A single mother rescues a millionaire trapped inside an abandoned bus deep in the forest. Mud cakes his legs, his body cold and frail, as if life has been drained from him, eyes shut tight like he's already gone. But in that moment, that seemingly random encounter, a spark of fate is lit, changing their lives forever. That morning, the forest was eerily quiet. No ox cart sounds from the village, no roosters calling late or children whining for snacks, just the soft crunch of Claire Bennett's rubber boots on a carpet of decaying leaves, and her daughter's cheerful voice. "Look, Mummy, the leaves are falling like rain." Claire watched her 3-year-old run ahead, clutching a fuzzy wool scarf and waving a dried weed like a magic wand. The morning sun hadn't yet pierced the canopy. Light flickered through the trees like the forest's tired breath. "Lila, slow down. Watch out for anthills," Claire called, not loudly, but firmly enough that the child stopped. Morning walks through this patch of woods weren't new to Claire. She came often to gather firewood, forage mushrooms, or find things most folks ignored. But today felt different. Not the smells, not the sounds. Something else. A vague feeling, like the forest was holding something back. "There's a car, Mummy. A big one." Lila pointed into a thick clump of brush. Claire frowned. There were never cars out here. No paths, no roads. She pushed through the branches, took a few cautious steps forward, and froze. A bus. Its yellow paint was faded, the body rusting, windows shattered. It lay half-sunk among trees and vines, like it had been swallowed years ago. But Claire saw it right away. The tire tracks were fresh. Someone had brought it here recently. The front door's lock still shone. Too new, too clean to have been there long. She turned sharply. "Step back. Wait right there." Her voice was sharper than usual. Claire circled to the back. The rear door hung ajar. She pushed it gently. It creaked open. The air inside was thick, pungent, mold, moss, and something metallic that made her stomach twist. She pulled out her phone and flicked on the flashlight. The beam landed on the back row. A man lay curled up there. Claire stepped forward, heart hammering. He didn't move. His head rested against shattered glass, one arm hanging limp. Eyes shut, hair matted, cheeks sunken like someone starved for days. His clothes were torn, his legs caked in dried mud. Instinctively, she stepped back, then took a deep breath. "He's sleeping. But he's cold, Mommy," Lila whispered from behind. At some point, the little girl had climbed up the steps. Claire pulled her down and gently pushed her aside. She crouched, reached out, calloused fingers brushing the man's hand. Her olive-green jacket rustled softly as she moved. "Sir?" she said quietly, shaking his arm gently. No response. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. There was a pulse, weak but steady. His skin was cold but not blue. He was alive. Claire didn't ask why. She knew she wouldn't get an answer. The way this man had been left here, abandoned in a locked bus, hidden deep in the woods, said more than any story ever could. 3 hours later, in a small wooden cabin on the edge of the village, the man lay on an old bed. The pillow and blanket were threadbare, but clean. Claire had just wiped dried blood from his forehead, her eyes locked on the faint rise and fall of his chest. Across the room, Lila hugged her knees, clinging to her one-eared stuffed rabbit. She whispered to her mother, "Can we keep him forever?" Claire didn't respond. She wrung out the cloth and walked to the stove. The fire crackled softly, warming a house that hadn't seen a man inside for a long, long time. When she returned to the bedside with a new bowl of warm water, his hand twitched, fingers gripping the blanket. Then, in a voice ragged as torn paper, he murmured, Don't come near me. Claire froze. Not because of the words, but because of how he said them. Like someone being hunted by something truly terrible. Rain had fallen from afternoon to midnight. Claire stood at the window, holding a cup of ginger tea gone cold. Rain tapped a slow rhythm on the tin roof, like someone knocking from another world. Soft, steady, unrelenting. The small wooden house nestled in the countryside was dimly lit by a single yellow bulb. Its glow reflected off familiar things: a wobbly wooden chair, a wall clock running a few minutes slow, a thin curtain torn at the edge. Across the room, the man still lay motionless, head slightly tilted, lips dry, forehead faintly furrowed. Claire had lost count of how many times she changed the warm compress since bringing him home. All she knew was that every time she looked at him, she felt something between concern and caution. In the corner, little Lila slept peacefully, arms around her worn rabbit. Her quiet breathing blended with the soft hiss of the rain. Claire stepped over and bent to check on him. Still a pulse, steady, warmer than last night. She dipped the cloth, wrung it out, and placed it on his forehead. When her hand touched his skin, he flinched. Not violently, but enough to startle her. As if, even unconscious, he sensed danger. Claire didn't pull away. She leaned in instead, watching him more closely. This man wasn't just some drifter hiding in the woods. No alcohol on his breath, no dazed, vacant stare of an addict. If anything, even in his weakened state, there was something composed, a face used to control. She sat beside him for a long while, chin resting on one hand, not from tiredness, but from too many unanswered questions. Eventually, she sighed, stood, and blew out the light, leaving only the low flicker of the stove in the corner. The next morning, the sky was still grey and heavy. The yard was soaked, and damp air crept through the door. Claire rose early, boiled water, made thin porridge. As she sliced ginger, she glanced toward the bedroom. Still asleep. Lila, too, one arm flung over her head like a curled-up kitten. 10 minutes later, Claire carried the steaming bowl in. She set it on the bedside table and gently shook his hand. "Wake up. There's hot porridge. Eat if you can." He stirred. His eyes cracked open, cloudy, exhausted. Before she could say more, he jerked his hand away with too much force. The bowl tipped. A few drops splashed on her skin. "Hey, calm down." Claire stepped back. Not frightened, but careful. She looked him in the eye and said, "I'm not going to hurt you. It's just porridge." And warm water. That's all. The man's breathing was shallow, rapid. His chest rose and fell. Hands clenched the blanket. His eyes darted, frightened, alert. But after a moment he settled. His gaze scanned the room. Low wooden ceiling, old walls, a small stove in the corner. His lips moved, voice rough. I don't remember. I don't know where this is." Claire's tone lowered, not soft, but steady. "This is my house. You're here because I found you. When you're better, you can go. No one's keeping you." He nodded slowly, like nodding was all he had left in him. She sighed. "What do I call you? Do you remember your name?" He stared at the floor, silent. "Fine. I'll call you Jack. Easy to remember. You can correct me when you remember the real one." She placed the bowl and a glass of water on the table, then stepped outside, leaving him with his emptiness. By evening, the rain had eased. Lila sat on the floor, coloring on the back of an old calendar. Claire was sorting winter clothes when the girl ran over, picture in hand. "I drew our house, Mummy," she smiled and pointed. "That's you, that's me, and that's Uncle Jack." In the drawing, the three of them stood together. The man in the middle was tall, messy-haired, with a beard. Claire barely glanced. ready to move on, when Lila whispered, "Mommy, remember that show we watched? The Missing People?" There was a man who looked like Uncle Jack. Claire stiffened. "What show?" "The one you had on while sewing." They showed pictures. He looked just like him. Claire didn't answer, just said, "Go wash your hands. Time to eat." When night fell completely, Claire brought a new bowl of porridge into the room. The door was slightly ajar. Jack was sitting up, back against the wall. The lamp's light spilled across his face. Pale, but steadier now. He looked at Claire, his eyes no longer frantic, but distant. She set the bowl down, slid the spoon in. "Eat a little." He took it. His hands still trembled. "Thank you," he said, softly, sincerely, without trying to please. "No need," Claire replied. "I help because I can, not out of pity." He nodded, said nothing else. She stood for a while, then turned to go. Before leaving, she looked back. "Someone like you. You're not a nobody. But your name, or what you used to be. I won't ask. I'll wait till you're ready." The stove flickered, casting warm light on the walls. Outside, the rain started again, quiet, steady, like whispers in the sleep of someone who just escaped hell and still didn't know where they'd landed. The next morning, the sun came out. Not a blazing sun, just a quiet light filtering through eucalyptus leaves still wet with rain. The ground was soft, but no longer soaked. Fallen leaves were scattered across the yard, as if the forest had just sighed in relief after 3 days of rain. Claire opened the door. Cool air swept into the house. Lila sat braiding her stuffed rabbit's ears, while Jack, the man who still didn't remember his name, was crouched by the porch, fixing a leaky faucet. She set a hot cup of tea beside him and said softly, "Drink this to warm up." Mornings here are usually chilly. Jack looked up and nodded. He didn't talk much, wasn't polite in the usual way, but maintained a quiet composure that didn't make people uncomfortable. Claire sat on the wooden bench and pulled Lila into her lap. After a moment, she said gently, "You're probably wondering where this place is." Jack gave a small nod. Claire gazed out toward the forest. "This village is called Woodpine. It's small, sits at the edge of the woods, about 3 hours from the nearest town. People here live quietly, believe what they see, and don't trust what's new. Not bad people, just slow to open up." She paused for a moment, letting Jack keep up. "I'm Claire. I do odd jobs, mending clothes, yard work, whatever people need. I live with this little one, Lila. Her dad left before she even knew how to say the word dad." Jack didn't reply, but his gaze softened. Claire looked at her daughter. This one's a chatterbox, but kinder than most grown-ups. Lila looked up, beaming. "I saw you on TV. Mummy and I watched it the other day." Claire's hands froze for a second. She gently squeezed her daughter's shoulder. That was someone else. TV is full of pretend. She turned to Jack and offered a faint smile. Kids have good memories, but even better imaginations. Jack gave a faint smile. Not annoyed, more like someone used to having identities put on him that he didn't recognize. From that day, Jack quietly blended into Claire's daily rhythm. No one asked him to, but every morning he was up early, sweeping the yard, drying firewood, fixing the door hinge that had been sagging for seasons. The way he worked, neat, clean, precise, felt like someone long accustomed to discipline. Lila clung to him like a shadow. She dragged a chair next to his whenever he worked, watched him clean tools, taught him how to weave grass, and chattered about the neighbors like he was a long-lost relative. One time, while scraping rust off a blade, Jack suddenly flinched. A truck horn echoed faintly in the distance. Not loud, but sharp. He froze, eyes narrowing slightly, his back tensing as if by reflex. Just as quickly, he steadied himself again, but Claire had seen it. She didn't ask. She just turned away, opened the tap, and let the water run over the back of her hand, her eyes lingering on something. Not suspicion exactly, more like a pause of thought that didn't yet have a name. The next day, as Claire took Lila to the market, she noticed a few women by the well falling unusually silent as she approached. Quick glances, half-spoken whispers. "I heard he's been to prison," one voice, quieter than necessary. "Doesn't look it, though. Seems more like city folk," another said. Claire walked past without stopping, eyes forward, back straight. Lila asked, "Were they talking about Uncle Jack, Mummy?" "Yeah," Claire replied, barely above a whisper. "Anyone new always gets talked about." That afternoon, old Pete stopped by. He tapped his cane against the wooden fence. "Claire, I hear there's a stranger at your place. Thought I'd see for myself." Jack was pulling weeds in the yard. Hearing Pete's voice, he stood, brushed off his hands and came over. Pete studied him closely, very closely. "You don't look like the rumors," Pete said, squinting. "Still stronger than half the boys I hired last season." Jack gave a faint smile. "Just doing my best." Claire stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. He fixed the leaky faucet in under 10 minutes. Pete raised his brows slightly, but his eyes lingered on Jack. A short pause, like he was trying to recall where he'd seen that face before. The air turned still. No one said anything else. "The pump at my place has been rattling for days," Pete said, changing tone. "If you've got time, mind taking a look?" Jack nodded. "Sure." Claire looked at the two of them, sensing that someone had just given her home a quiet nod of approval, not with words, but with the silent acceptance of an old man who'd seen a lot. That night, after Lila was asleep and the stove still glowed warm, Claire washed the dishes. Jack dried a knife that had already been cleaned 3 times. For a moment, the sound of his footsteps echoed through the wooden kitchen, slow, steady, as if this house that had been quiet for 3 years was coming alive again, with a kind of sound that had long been missing. Claire paused at the sink, her eyes stinging slightly. Not from sadness, not even from emotion. Sometimes, peace leaves a person feeling hollow too. At the end of the day, Claire opened the wardrobe and cleared a small shelf. She folded away an extra towel, leaving an empty space. Jack stood behind her. He saw everything. He didn't say a word, just folded his old jacket and placed it there, gently, silently, like someone who had once been left behind, was learning for the first time how to be given a place. That morning, the sky was strangely clear. The air was cold, dry, and quiet, like someone had just stepped out of a long dream. More leaves had fallen. The trees in the forest looked thinner, revealing the bony outline of late autumn. Jack, the man who had been living in Claire's wooden house for almost a month, woke up with a feeling he couldn't name. Not exactly tired, not quite hollow. Just off. He stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, staring at his face like he was trying to recognize someone he used to know, but couldn't quite place. Claire poured tea, watching him from the kitchen. "You didn't sleep again, did you?" Jack nodded. "When I finally dozed off, I saw that bus again, at night. Someone was calling a name, but it wasn't Jack." He stopped, quiet. Claire walked over and placed the cup of tea in his hand, her voice soft. "Let it come back, piece by piece. Don't force it to be clear. Memory's like people. It needs time to find its way home after being hurt." Jack looked at her. In his eyes, something eased. That afternoon, Claire took Lila to Maribel's general store, like always. Jack came along. Lila chattered along the road, swinging her torn-eared stuffed bunny. The air in the village was colder. When people saw the three of them walking, especially the tall man trailing behind, whispers began. Claire said nothing. She held her daughter's hand tighter, walking steadily, spine straight. Maribel's store was just the same, the smell of cinnamon and toasted rice floating under warm yellow lights. The owner was cutting old newspapers to wrap dried fish. "Haven't seen the three of you together in a while," Maribel said, eyes briefly flicking to Jack. "This one's looking strong lately." Jack gave a slight nod, silent. Maribel smiled, then pulled another sheet of newspaper. It was a bit torn. On the front was a faded black and white photo. A man in a suit, standing in a grand courtyard, under the headline, "Victor Harlan, the man who vanished from one of the country's largest charity empires." Jack glanced at it, but that glance was like a punch to the chest. His chest tightened. One hand clenched the edge of the counter. Claire saw it, a tiny movement, but unmistakable. Maribel chuckled. "Wow, the resemblance is something. Related, maybe. The hair, the forehead, the eyes, almost identical." Claire glanced at Jack. He just shook his head, but his eyes hadn't left the picture. "Probably just someone who looks like me." He stepped outside, earlier than usual. Claire paid for the goods and followed, her hand gently guiding Lila's back. On the way home, the sky darkened suddenly, heavy clouds, strong wind. Claire walked in the middle, Jack silently behind. Lila skipped ahead, hopping over puddles from old rains. Everything seemed normal, until Jack stopped. His hand rose to his forehead. The pain hit like lightning. A shove. The ground vanished. Wind howling. A familiar face, sneering. A whisper, close to his ear. "You trusted the wrong people." Then darkness. Jack collapsed, his head hitting the grassy roadside. Claire turned, panic rising. "Jack!" He didn't answer. Lila burst into tears. Claire knelt beside him, shaking him, her hands trembling. Just then, a pickup truck pulled up. Pete slammed the brakes and jumped out. "What happened? Good Lord!" "He fainted. Help me get him to the clinic." "Get in. Now!" The clinic lights were harsh. The smell of antiseptic hung sharp in the air. Claire sat by the bed, gripping a glass of water like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Lila had fallen asleep in a chair. Pete stood at the door, silent. Jack lay there. The heart monitor beeped steadily. Sweat dotted his forehead. Then his eyelids twitched. Slow, but certain. Claire leaned in. "Can you hear me?" He blinked. Once, twice. Then his eyes opened wide. They were no longer clouded. They were sharp, clear, cold, like freshly polished steel. Claire flinched. "Jack!" He opened his mouth slightly. "Victor!" She tilted her head. "What did you say?" "Victor Harlan," he repeated clearly. The name dropped into the room, quiet, but ice cold. Pete froze. Claire didn't respond. Jack turned his head, staring at the white ceiling, breathing slow but sure. "I remember now." Claire said nothing. She quietly stepped out of the room, still holding the moss-green jacket he had left behind the day before. The wind in the hospital corridor swept through, catching the hem of the jacket. The sky outside had turned a shade of lead. The city around them was unfamiliar, but not noisy. Claire stood still for a while. What filled her wasn't exactly confusion. It was something cracking open. The man she had saved, once thought to be someone with nothing left, now had a name again, a past, and she was just beginning to think about trust. But trust never quite arrives in time, when the other person has already started stepping out of the dark. She left the hospital in the late afternoon. On the way home, the streetlights sliced through the car window, like thin cuts across the weariness inside her. Everything around her was the same, but it all seemed to just pass by, never really touching her. In Claire's mind, the image of Victor sitting in that stark white hospital room kept returning, not because he looked weak, but because for the first time he looked at her like he was seeing something he thought he'd lost. By the time she got home, darkness had blanketed the mountain ridge in the distance. Claire opened the door. The faint scent of burned wood from the kitchen greeted her. She didn't turn on the lights right away. For a moment, she stood silently on the porch, as if trying to shake off the stillness that had settled deep into her bones. Claire made tea slowly. The water whistled in the clay kettle as the wind howled in bursts through the cracks in the door. The air in the house tonight felt heavier than usual, though it was still the same wood stove, same table, same patched cloth hanging on the wall. Victor was arranging his shoes outside. He wiped the dried mud off them with an old towel Claire had given him. His movements were clean, deliberate, as if he'd done this 100 times, though clearly his hands no longer belonged to this house. Neither of them said a word. Lila had gone to bed early. Rain began to fall in a soft drizzle. Claire placed a cup of tea in front of Victor, then sat across from him. She didn't look directly at him, but her voice was steady. "So now, you're Victor Harlan." Victor looked up. He replied softly, "Yeah." A single word, but inside it were 7 years of hiding, surviving, and nearly being buried alive all over again. Claire didn't ask right away. She gave him time. But then she said, "Yesterday at the clinic, I saw you staring at the ceiling for hours without saying a word. I knew you were remembering something, but not ready to speak." Victor stared into his tea. "I didn't know where to start," he breathed. "Start from the part that hurts most," Claire replied. "Neither harsh nor pressing." Victor gave a dry laugh. Not the polite kind. The kind of laugh someone makes after standing at the edge of a cliff, then stepping back. Not dead, but not whole either. The worst part wasn't being pushed off the mountain. It was remembering who I trusted. They sat there for a long time. Then Victor began to speak, slowly, without embellishment. "I didn't die from the fall. I lost my memory, swept away by the water, fell deep into the forest. An old woodsman found me. I spent the first few years like a ghost, working odd jobs at logging camps, guarding sheds. No name, no papers, no questions. Starting last year, fragments started coming back. Names, a logo, a clip from a promotional video. They kept showing up in my head." He looked at Claire. "I shouldn't have gone digging alone." Claire nodded gently. "And they found you?" she asked. "Victor, I don't know who exactly, but it's not far from Derek and Marlene. I was attacked at a bus station, knocked unconscious. The next time I woke up was inside that bus." Claire asked quietly, "They wanted you to disappear for good. They failed the first time. The second time they hit harder. They want me to die slowly. No evidence. No one to remember me." Claire closed her eyes. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the chair, as if looking for something solid to hold on to. Outside, the rain grew heavier. The wind howled across the roof like voices screaming in the woods. Victor leaned his head into his hand. "I don't know who's behind all this, but I do know one thing. If I go public now, if people know I'm alive, I'll die a third time." "So what are you going to do?" Claire asked. He stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside the door. "Stay quiet. Investigate from the shadows. This time, no one knows I'm alive. Except you." Claire didn't respond, but her eyes, no longer those of a woman sheltering a stranger, were now the eyes of someone who just realized. She was standing beside a man who had once made headlines, and who now stood at the crossroads between justice and a revenge that might not be safe. Before going to bed, Claire cleared the table. As she picked up the teacups, she paused for a moment. "How long do you plan to keep disappearing?" Victor replied, without turning. "Until I find someone worth trusting. And find the one who has to fall." Claire nodded, then turned to go, but she added, just loud enough for him to hear, "Don't forget, you still owe me 2 things, a proper thank you, and one reason to believe you're not bringing a storm back into this house." Victor didn't answer right away. He stood still for a long time after those words. He didn't argue. Instead, that night, he opened an old notebook, and for the first time wrote the first line in red ink. "If I die again, this time it will be knowing exactly who pushed me." And then, a thought flickered through Claire's mind. As she stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the rain and watching the firelight dance. Is there a devastating secret buried inside that returning memory? And if there is, will it be enough to drag her and her daughter into the storm too? If you're still reading this far, help Claire answer that thought in the comments below. Early morning, with dew still clinging to the wooden fence and forest birds just beginning their chirping, Victor was already out of bed. He put on his coat and walked toward the small shed behind the garden, where Uncle Pete once said there were some old things nobody touches anymore. The rusty padlock yielded after a few deft moves. His hands still remembered how to handle small mechanisms, not forcefully, but precisely. When the door opened, the scent of old metal and oil wafted out. In the dim light, he searched for anything useful, an old radio still able to pick up AM signals, a dusty box of financial newspapers, and an old mobile phone with a removable battery, the kind that's nearly impossible to trace. Victor sat down on the cold wooden floor, leaning against a rotting crate. He opened the newspapers, flipping through pages, marking lines with a pencil. His eyes moved quickly, but missed nothing. The habits of financial analysis, asset evaluation, and tracking cash flow were returning, bit by bit, as if the part of him that had been stolen was finding its way back. By the time Claire woke up, the sky had brightened. She poured tea, turned on the sewing machine, and began a day that seemed like any other. But clearly, something in the house felt different. Victor entered the kitchen, holding a few folded newspapers. "I need more data, old documents. Is there anyone nearby who keeps newspapers?" he asked, his voice steady, eyes scanning for possibilities. Claire thought for a moment, then replied, "Yes. Ms. Maribel. She doesn't throw away old papers. She saves them for wrapping packages, but if you want to take any, you'll need to know how to talk to her." Victor nodded. "Can I go with you?" Claire hesitated slightly, then nodded. "Let's go, but let me do the talking first." Maribel's grocery store was near the crossroads, where the village usually gathered each morning. As the two stepped into the yard, familiar eyes immediately glanced their way. Whispers rose like leaves rustling across a tin roof. Maribel was arranging papers under the counter. Hearing footsteps, she looked up, pulled her glasses down her nose, and stared at Victor without blinking. "What do you need, Victor?" she asked, calling his name as if she had never forgotten. He answered immediately, without pretense. "I need old newspapers." From the past 3 years, related to Harlan Corporation. Maribel glanced at Claire for a second. Claire nodded. She exhaled, took a bunch of keys from an old tin box and said, "I won't let you take them away. You can read them here. I'll sit and watch with you." Victor nodded. "I don't expect anyone to believe me. I just need the truth." They sat in a small corner behind the counter. A soft yellow desk lamp illuminated the old wooden table. Victor flipped through each page, his hands moving as if he had done this thousands of times. The pencil, borrowed from Maribel, began marking names. Derek Harlan, CEO restructuring Harlan after his brother's disappearance. Marlene Shaw, the woman of modern philanthropy. Dana Everett, financial assistant, a new factor in Harlan Foundation's expansion strategy. Victor paused at Dana. His eyes lingered for a few seconds. Then he spoke slowly. She once picked me up at the airport, the last time I went to a meeting in Switzerland. She had only been hired a few months then. Maribel set her teacup down, shaking her head slightly. But I heard she was later sent to handle charity trips in remote areas. A financial assistant going to the front lines. That sounds odd. Victor said nothing, but in his mind, the pieces were beginning to fit together. As evening fell, the sky remained overcast. Clouds covered the western trees, and the light dimmed quickly. Victor sat in his room, the door slightly ajar. On the table, the old phone lay silent like an untriggered bomb. He had inserted the SIM card, checked the battery, but hadn't dialed yet. In his hand was a small piece of paper, with Louisa James's number, the person in charge of his disappearance case 7 years ago. Victor stared at the numbers. 7 years had passed. No one knew if she was still working or had been forced to forget. He didn't call immediately. First, he turned on the AM radio in the shed. Tuned to the old police frequency, he listened for news. Nothing. Good. Then, he went online using a secondary phone, checking if the name Louisa James still appeared in local police records. An old article surfaced. Detective Louisa James reassigned to the civilian unit in West Point after the mid-investigation halt of the Victor Harlan disappearance case. It's real. Still the same person. But not enough for him to trust. He composed a brief message. I need to confirm some information. Meet me at the place where the investigation was halted. Alone. Do not contact me back. He sent it to a temporary email inbox, one of the dead channels he used for emergencies when he was a financial coordinator. 10 hours later, as night fell, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Victor let it ring 3 times before answering. A female voice spoke, short and firm. Detective James here. Victor didn't state his name, didn't confirm. Instead, he asked coldly, the day I disappeared, what was I wearing? 3 seconds of silence. Then the reply, grey linen shirt, black cashmere coat. Patek watch. Blue tie, no tie clip. Mud on the left heel of your shoe. Victor closed his eyes, nodded. Exactly. He exhaled for the first time in hours. I'm Victor Harlan. I need to meet you. They arranged to meet at an old inn, once the investigation's starting point, later dissolved due to personnel reasons. Louisa arrived on time, entered without unnecessary words. Grey coat, hair neatly tied, weary appearance but sharp eyes. She pulled out a file from her coat, placed it on the table without explanation. Then she spoke. I once tried to escalate your case to the federal level, but Mayor Nolan pulled the file from my hands. I was reassigned to the civilian unit. The matter ended there, at least on paper. Victor opened the file. His eyes remained calm, precise, unwavering. But when he stopped at the asset transfer analysis with a forged signature, his hand tightened slightly. Then Louisa produced a small USB drive. Here, I recovered an internal recording from Harlan Corp's server, stored at the law office, deleted 3 times, but remnants remained. She placed a small player on the table, pressed play. A female voice, cold, calm. As long as the signature looks right, the lawyers will handle the rest. Victor didn't sleep. All night, he sat at the desk, the warm yellow light casting over the pages pinned together with red ink lines. Fund transfers, the timeline of the reinstated will, power of attorney documents, falsified scans. His mind was no longer foggy. Now, it was strategy. Each fragment of the old system, one he used to control, was being peeled back, layer by layer. And at the center of it all was Dana Everett. Dana sat in the glass-walled executive office of Harlan Corp, 27th floor. The desk was tidy, fresh flowers, screen aglow. Everything spoke of stability. But her hand was trembling, just slightly. That morning she'd received an unmarked envelope. No return address. Just a single USB and a note. A document is only legal if the signer is still alive. She didn't need to open the USB to know what was on it. Dana wasn't stupid. She knew she was being watched, and worse, she didn't know who was watching her. She pulled out her phone, ready to call Derek, but stopped. If Derek knew, what would he say? Protect her, or make it go away? Dana leaned back in her chair, her eyes calculating, but tinged with a fear she couldn't shake. Everything she had inherited through loyalty could crumble with one single exposure. Back in Woodpine Village, the weather had turned. The rain no longer came in drizzles, but in gusts swept by wind. Claire was mending the collar of a guest's coat. Lila was asleep on the armchair by the fire. Victor walked in from the back garden, coat damp, holding some printed documents from town. He set the papers down, added a log to the fire. Said nothing. Claire looked his way, not with the wary suspicion of the early days, but with a deeper kind of attention. He sat, holding the cup of tea she'd left out. She spoke softly. "You're not afraid, but I know. That doesn't mean you're not lonely." Victor looked up, surprised. Claire didn't meet his gaze, kept stitching. "You sit there, digging through files, confronting people, but you don't share it with anyone. Don't rely on anyone." She cut the thread, folded the shirt, then stood and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "If it comes to court, if you have to face down an entire system, I'll testify, if you need me to." Victor said nothing, but the way his hand tightened around the cup revealed a quiet, aching kind of gratitude. That evening, old Pete dropped by. He brought a sack of boiled potatoes and some smoked jerky. "You'll need more than greens in this weather," he said with a laugh, pouring some homemade rice wine. When Claire went to the kitchen, he leaned toward Victor and spoke in a low voice. "I know who you are, and I don't believe you fell off that mountain by accident." Victor looked at him. Their eyes met in silence. Pete continued, "I can't do much, but if you need someone to confirm where you were, what you did, I'll speak the truth. My eyes aren't blind." The next afternoon, Maribel brought over the fabric Claire had ordered. Seeing Victor fixing a broken table leg, she paused. "They say you're a big deal," she said. "I don't care. Just don't hurt Claire or the girl." Victor nodded firmly. "I never would." She studied him for a moment. Then, as if talking to herself, "Someone who's been thrown off a mountain doesn't fall easy the second time. I don't believe the weak survive 7 years." Then she turned and left. But her words felt like a declaration. Night fell. Victor entered his room and opened his laptop. He connected with Louisa through a secure line. "I've sent the audio file. Can you handle it?" On the other end, Louisa responded curtly. "I've got someone in digital forensics. You'll have a report by tomorrow." Victor nodded. Louisa paused, then asked, "Any reaction from Dana?" Victor looked down at the second USB on his desk, the one he hadn't sent. "She's waiting to see if I'm a warning or a sentence." Louisa chuckled quietly. "And what are you going to be?" Victor answered, his voice colder than usual. "Both." Claire saw him step out onto the porch, staring into the night sky. She placed a light coat over his shoulders, without a word, without needing one. Not everyone understands a man who came back from the dead. But she understood the most important thing. He didn't want anyone dying in his place, ever again. Meanwhile, on the 27th floor of a distant city office, Dana Everett sat alone under her desk lamp. In her head, the sound of a door knocking echoed. Someone she hadn't seen yet, but who was pressing close behind every breath. One question lingered in her mind. If Victor is alive, who's the next to be unearthed? Nearly 100 kilometers away, in Woodpine, light rain fell. A year-end rain, not too cold, but steady enough to slow the village by a beat. Victor sat in the kitchen, gently swirling the ginger tea Claire had poured. The house was warm, lit with soft yellow light, the scent of fresh-baked pastries in the air. Claire stood by the stove, drying Lila's hair. The girl had just had a bath, and the smell of baby shampoo lingered. "Uncle," Lila turned around, bright-eyed. "It's raining today, so Mum didn't make me go outside to learn my ABCs. Want to do puzzles with me?" Victor looked at the little girl. In her eyes, there was no suspicion, no question of his real identity. Just trust, pure and instinctive. He nodded. "Give me 5 minutes. I'm writing a letter." Claire turned and smiled, said nothing. But in her gaze was a quiet strength, saying without words, "You're not alone. Not anymore." Later that night, after Lila had gone to sleep, Claire brewed another pot of tea. She set a cup in front of Victor and sat across the table. "Do you still trust her?" she asked quietly, without pressing. Victor exhaled. "I don't need Dana to be good. I just need her to understand. If she crosses that line again, this time, she falls with Derek." Claire studied him. "And if she turns on you again?" Victor looked down at his hands once beaten, dragged through the woods, still scarred on the thumb. "Then, I'll take it as something I deserved, because I once trusted her." Claire nodded and stood. But before she left the table, she placed a hand on his shoulder. No pressure, no grip, just contact. "If you ever need to stand somewhere to tell the world who you really were, I'll stand next to you." Victor turned, his gaze softened. No thank you was spoken, but his hand gently rested over hers for a few very real seconds. Meanwhile, Dana sat alone in her luxury apartment. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows on the ceiling. She was replaying the audio, the sound of her own voice, a line she once thought airtight. "All we need is the notarized copy." He can't confirm it anymore. Hearing it now, the line felt colder than the voice that had once ordered her to say it. From a drawer, she pulled a bundle of files. Backup documents, internal transactions, a private lawyer's payroll, photos of the original handwritten will Victor once drafted. Then she picked up her phone, texted a simple message to the number Victor had left. "I'll cooperate. No conditions." The moment it sent, she dropped her head onto the desk. No tears. But it was as if her whole body had just shed a weight that had been dragging her out of herself. The next morning, Victor saw the message. He quietly tucked the phone into his pocket, then stepped out back. Claire was hanging up children's clothes to dry. Seeing him approach, she tilted her head. "Good news?" Victor nodded slightly. "Maybe." Claire didn't press. She handed him a clothespin. He took it, helping her finish the laundry. The wind blew. The sun was soft. No words were spoken. But there, between two people once broken, something was quietly rising again. And far away, a man sat in a leather chair, scanning a Q4 financial report. Derek Harlan glanced over the documents, his eyes sharp, alert. But for the first time in 7 years, his finger tapped the desk off rhythm. A secretary stepped in, murmuring, "Dana's taken sudden leave. She's unreachable." Derek said nothing. Just turned back to the screen, where the latest headline read, "Harlan Case, Old Files Reopened. Anonymous Witness Begins Sharing Evidence." Derek pressed his lips together, softly. "Victor, you're really alive, aren't you?" Not every war starts with gunfire. Some begin with a single look that says it all. This time, there's no turning back. Thursday afternoon. The sun dipped early, but it wasn't gentle. The wind from the forest blasted in hot, suffocating waves. Everything felt electrically charged. Victor stood on the porch, phone in hand. On the other end, Louisa's voice was short but clear. She submitted it, in person, signed and acknowledged. The evidence is enough to indict Derek, and the whole system behind him. Victor didn't respond immediately. He looked toward the forest. No relief, no triumph, just the weight of a realization. The game had officially begun, this time without any curtain to hide behind. Claire stepped out, still holding a basket of carrots. She looked at him. "Is it done?" Victor answered softly. "It's begun." Elsewhere, a few 100 kilometers from Woodpine, in an eerily quiet glass-walled room, Derek Harlan sat alone, flipping through an internal report. His security aide had just stepped out after saying, "Our people in Woodpine were driven out." There's a possibility. Victor Harlan is still alive. He didn't move. His finger tapped the black stone tabletop without rhythm. The door opened. Marlene walked in and set down a cup of coffee. Seeing the look on Derek's face, she froze. "What's wrong?" Derek didn't look at her. He only muttered, as if to himself, "If he's still alive, then I have to be the one to finish it." Back in Woodpine, the sun had set. Lila was playing pretend tea party inside the house when she suddenly looked up. "Mum, there's a black car parked out front." Claire dropped the basket of carrots. Victor rushed outside. In front of the gate stood a black SUV, tinted windows, no plates. Victor froze. He didn't need to check. He recognized that still, suffocating aura, the kind that followed men who killed without leaving a trace. "Claire, get inside. Lock the door." She didn't ask. She ran. But she had only just locked the front door when, crash. One section of the fence was smashed down. Victor turned, grabbing a metal rod, leaning against the house. A dark figure lunged at him, fast and precise. The first blow dazed Victor, making him stagger. Another kick to his ribs. He collapsed, blood dripping from his brow. The man crouched over him, grabbed his collar and whispered, "You should have stayed dead 7 years ago." Just then, a scream rang out from the house. "Mom! Is Uncle Jack okay?" The child's voice cut through the air like a knife, not fear, but genuine worry. Love. Victor inhaled sharply, but before he could react, a sharp crack echoed behind the attacker. The man turned. Claire stood there, holding Pete's salt pellet rifle. She didn't wait. She pulled the trigger. Thump! The shot hit him in the chest. He howled, staggered, then fled into the woods. Victor gasped, lying flat on his back. Claire ran over, helping him up. Her grip on the gun didn't loosen. "One more shot if you fall again," she said, trembling but firm. Victor laughed, through pain, through exhaustion, through relief. The echo of the salt round hadn't faded when barking erupted down the village road. Minutes later, neighbors began gathering outside Claire's gate. Henry, the motorbike repairman, was the first to speak. "What happened? Someone broke into the house? Good God." An elderly woman clung to her son, voice shaky. "I heard a gunshot." "Claire, is little Lila okay?" Victor was upright by then, blood on his temple, eyes still squinting from the blow. He stepped forward, trying to keep his voice steady. "No one's hurt. Just a stranger." He ran off. Pete showed up, old rifle slung over his shoulder, swearing, "Damn it! Thought we'd have peace in this village for a while. Nobody's torn down a fence in years. Maribel stood just behind him, face tight. We're a small village, but now big troubles come knocking. No one spoke after that. The silence was thick, like mud mixed with stone. The villagers looked at Victor, some curious, some wary, some just avoiding his eyes. Claire stepped forward, placing herself between him and the crowd. This man is someone I chose to help. If anyone has something to say it to me. Pete raised his head, voice rough. Claire's right. In this village, good people stay. Anyone with a problem, pack up and leave. The tension slowly eased. But the wary glances lingered. They turned and walked away. Not because the fear was gone, but because no one knew what to do with it. Claire turned to Victor, her voice quiet. See? Just one attack, and the village no longer feels like it belongs to them. Victor didn't answer, but his eyes no longer held just concern. They carried shame, guilt. That evening, Pete and Maribel came by. Pete brought a first aid kit, grumbling as he bandaged Victor's head. Next time there's a fight, yell for help. I still got an old rifle that shoots fine. Maribel set a pot of soup on the table, scolding. Getting beat up and not saying anything. How do you expect anyone to season the soup right? Lila ran around the house, still clutching her stuffed bear. Every so often, she glanced at Victor and whispered, "Uncle Jack's okay now." Claire poured tea, set the cup gently in front of Victor. Warm enough to drink, cool enough not to burn. He picked it up and said quietly, "Thank you for not stepping back." Claire replied simply, "Not everyone gets a chance to shoot twice." They looked at each other. In Claire's eyes now, there was no longer just affection, but a choice, a commitment to protect him no matter who he had been or what he had lost. Night fell. Lila fell asleep early, worn out after a turbulent day. Victor stood by, watching Claire tuck in the child. Silent, not interrupting, not speaking. He only thought, I have to protect them. And for the first time since that accident years ago, another thought followed. I'm allowed to belong here. Near midnight, Victor turned on his phone and called Louisa. They've attacked. No more hiding. Send the files to the prosecutor. Louisa was silent for a few seconds, then replied, All right, but be ready. Once it's public, no one stays behind the curtain. Victor nodded. I've lived in the shadows long enough. Time to step forward, no matter the cost. He hung up. The wind slipped through the house. The kitchen was warm. The scent of ginger tea lingered in the air. Claire leaned against the doorway, watching him, saying nothing, asking nothing. Victor stepped beside her. They stood together, looking out at the forest. Quiet, but not still, and in another room, where the lights stayed on until nearly dawn. Derek Harlan held the freshly printed report. One headline jumped out at him. Prosecutor's office confirms receipt of case files related to Victor Harlan's disappearance. He folded the report and exhaled slowly. Marlene, prepare an exit plan and a kill. His voice was calm, like a blade, freshly honed. The storm was no longer on paper, and this time no one would escape if they stood on the wrong side. The sky wasn't fully light yet. The city skyline was a pale grey, veiled in a thin mist, like a curtain drawn before a stage about to close. Victor sat in the shabby motel room Louisa had temporarily arranged for him. On the table, a white dress shirt, a dark tie, and a thick file folder marked with yellow tabs sticking out like porcupine quills. He didn't touch any of it, just stared at the phone on the table. It vibrated. A nameless number. Victor picked it up and held it to his ear without speaking. A deep, male voice came through, unhurried. You really think you're clean enough to sit on that stage? Victor said nothing. Victor, I don't want you dead, but I've done it once. Don't make me do it again. To that woman. And the child. Victor's hand clenched. Claire, Derek said, his voice steady. And the girl. Home address, preschool, daily routines. I have it all. Victor replied quietly, but each word cut like a blade. If you touch them, I won't just drag you into the light. I'll pull down the swamp you're standing in. With nothing left behind. He hung up, sat for another minute, then stood, buttoned his shirt sleeves, and tucked a handkerchief into his chest pocket, embroidered with the name Jack. A trial without a court, a battle with no more room for mercy. In Woodpine, Claire woke earlier than usual. The sky was overcast, wind whistling through the fence. She made breakfast like always, poured tea like every day, but the kitchen felt colder than usual. Lila looked at her mother and asked, "Mum, why aren't there any pancakes this morning?" Claire sat beside her daughter. She smoothed Lila's hair, eyes distant. Because today, someone has to stand before a lot of people to reclaim the name that was taken from him. Uncle Jack? Claire nodded. And if anyone tries to scare him, I hope he remembers, there are two people here who've always believed he was real. State Courthouse, dark oak panels, light from the ceiling beaming down like stage lights. The tension was taut as a string. Though it was just a preliminary hearing, every seat was filled. Reporters, former employees, people who once donated to the Harlan Foundation, all here to see whether the man believed to be dead had truly returned. Derek Harlan sat straight, silver tie, eyes sharp like a blade forged by power. Victor walked in. No applause, but every gaze turned to him. He walked slowly, chin slightly raised. His eyes didn't drop, nor were they arrogant, just the look of a man with nothing left to hide. Louisa gave him a nod from the legal table. Dana, pale-faced, sat behind, gripping the edge of her seat. The judge spoke. 3 strikes of the gavel echoed against the wood-paneled walls. First came Louisa's testimony, unemotional, unembellished, but each fact cut like a carving. The real will and the forged one, signed by Dana. The asset transfers made within 2 weeks of the accident, secret deals between Derek and Mayor Nolan, an audio recording of Marlene and Dana discussing it in a law office. Dana took the stand. Her eyes shimmered slightly, but her voice was clear. I chose to stay silent. Then I chose to stand with those who believed I wasn't garbage. I was wrong, but this time, I choose to stay. No one in the room dared breathe. Derek silently clenched his fists. Victor was the last to speak. He began slowly, like telling a story, not to convince, but to remind. I used to be a man who had everything, but no one to share it with. Then I became someone no one remembered, but was asked just one question. Are you hungry? That question kept me alive. I'm not here to defeat Derek. I'm here because I won't let any child grow up having their name broken by someone, then told, "Be quiet. No one will believe you." That line, no one wrote it down, but everyone heard it. And then, silence. As if truth needs no applause. Only that no one turns away again. 3 days later, a warrant was issued to detain Derek and Marlene. Dana received a reduced sentence as an official witness. Louisa was reinstated as a federal lead investigator. Victor declined all offers to return to any position. He left only a brief note. I don't need the seat back. I just need a chalkboard, some chalk, and a few kids with enough hope to learn the alphabet again. Woodpine, late spring. Sunlight stretched softly across the small field. Forest winds slipped through loosely tied curtains. The old bus, once where Victor had been abandoned, was now painted a warm honey yellow, trimmed in white with clear glass. On its side, bold letters read, "Woodpine Classroom, where memory begins again." Pete stood beside the bus, brushing on the final drop of paint. Claire adjusted the bookshelf. The children waited, buzzing with excitement, each holding something, a tattered notebook, a worn-out pencil case, or simply their eager little hearts. Victor stood at the door, greeting each child as they stepped on. Some hadn't spoken a word in 2 years. Some had dropped out after a fight. But all of them, when they saw Victor, paused for a second, as if they knew. This was someone who wouldn't leave them. Claire stood behind him, placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "It's done," she said. Nothing more needed. Victor looked at her, then down at Lila, hugging her teddy bear, legs swinging, seated in the front row. She looked back and smiled like the first light of spring. He nodded slightly, his voice deep. "Now it truly begins." That evening, they had dinner on the porch. The air was cool, the breeze light. Pete told stories of his youth, once on the run for secretly dating the baker's daughter. Maribel complained the soup was bland, then ate 2 bowls. Lila sucked on her spoon, laughing even when she didn't quite understand the stories. Victor said nothing. His fingers tapped lightly on his teacup. No one noticed, but in his eyes was a quiet depth, like someone who knew he was finally alive again after a long, dark dream. And then he smiled, not loudly, but truly. Night fell. Victor peeked into Lila's room. She was asleep, still hugging her bear, lips softly moving in a dream. He pulled the blanket up to her chest, his movements slow, gentle, like he was afraid to disturb something sacred. Claire stood in the doorway. She didn't enter. She just whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear, "If today you chose forgiveness over revenge, then I believe you'd already won before walking into court." Victor didn't turn, but his shoulders trembled, just slightly. The next morning, Lila woke up, hugging her bear, and ran to the porch. "Uncle Jack, are we teaching again today?" Victor bent down, scooped her up. Her hair smelled like sunshine. He answered warmly, "Tomorrow, the day after, and many more to come." The bus rolled down the village road. Dust kicked up behind it. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Inside, the kids laughed and chattered. Victor sat in the front passenger seat, his hand resting on Claire's. Not holding, not gripping. Just a touch that said, "I'm not leaving again." In the rearview mirror, Victor saw himself. No tie, no spotlight, no flashy introductions. Just a man, finally allowed to stay, to be called by his true name. And in his heart, a question gently echoed, not one that sought an answer, but one that felt like a promise. If someone once forgotten can be rewritten, then who among us doesn't deserve a new beginning? A windless afternoon. The sun wasn't blazing, just spilling its last golden light over the ripening fields. Victor held Lila's hand in his left, Claire's in his right. The 3 of them walked along the narrow path between rice paddies, where crickets had begun to sing beneath the grass. The breeze rustled their clothes. The crops bent as if bowing to an old friend. Victor paused at a clearing near the edge of the forest, where he'd once wandered, not knowing who he was. He turned to Claire, his voice deep, warm. "That day, when you touched my hand in that rusted-out bus, I didn't remember my name, didn't know my home, but I remembered one thing most clearly." Claire looked at him, gentle. Victor looked into her eyes and smiled. "You asked me, 'Are you hungry?' No one had ever asked me that. No one had ever looked at someone like me with a question so kind." He knelt down. Lila stood beside him, eyes wide. Victor pulled out a ring he'd kept hidden for a long time, waiting for someone truly worthy. A ring with a stone that sparkled like a windless afternoon. "Will you walk with me? This time as Victor, No longer lost, no longer running. Just a man, choosing to stay. Claire said nothing. She just nodded, like she had when she opened her door to him, when she caught him as he fell, when she chose to believe in him, before knowing who he was. Lila shouted, "Say yes, Mommy!" They all burst into laughter. Victor stood and embraced them both. The wedding took place a week later, right in the village. No extravagant dress, no celebrities, no cameras. Claire wore a white dress she sewed herself. Simple, perfect. Victor wore a rolled-up dress shirt. Pete acted as witness, teary-eyed. Maribel brought a whole basket of baked goods, shared with everyone. Villagers set up bamboo chairs, picnic mats, brought wildflowers, loaves of bread, and even an old harmonica for the kids to play the first tune. No one mentioned Victor used to be a millionaire. No one mentioned Derek. All they saw was a man who had gone so far just to come home, and a woman, brave enough to bring a lost soul back. Mid-ceremony, little Lila ran up and hugged Victor tight in front of everyone. For the first time, she called out loud, "Daddy!" Victor froze, then bent down, embraced her, lips tight, but his eyes revealed everything. Claire looked at him, whispered, "Do you still remember the day I saved you?" Victor nodded. His reply was soft, yet heavier than any speech. "I haven't forgotten, because that was the day. I was born again." No one left early that day. They stayed until nightfall, until the first fireflies lit up like tiny stars of the earth. Laughter echoed through the forest, and somewhere, something very old, very deep, was finally mended, not by money, not by power, but by trust, by kindness. A few days after the wedding, they officially renovated the old house, turning it into a home with life, beauty, and the scent of a family of 3. Thank you for walking with us to the end of this journey. Thank you for believing that in a world that can be cold, kindness is never out of date. That sometimes a simple question like, "Are you hungry?" can save a life. We wish you, who listen to this story, enough light to move forward, enough warmth to live kindly, and enough courage to believe in good things. Wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever you've been through, you deserve a new beginning. And if you're needing one, then this is the moment.